and so he wrote like a blog post about how much he hated it. And but he said, like, you know, these Muppets books are the best beepity beep licensed comics ever. And so then I sent a press release the next day. Fantagraphics book says Boom Studios Muppets comics are the best blankety blank ever. Comes in A and B variant covers, and that got picked up a lot. And then well, I'm trying to think about the other like stupid stunts I did. But I mean, everything like sort of comes in this idea of like, okay, I'm borrowing $100 from people on the street, and I'm going to throw it somewhere, and then I'm going to stop something, and I'm going to get a ton of press internationally. You know, what can you do? You know, and those are easy things. You just have to be very creative and come up with crazy ideas, and you know, yeah. So.
I mean, knowing your pitch and knowing your product and knowing all the different angles that it can be interpreted, you might have a great superhero book, but it might also be a great romance story or a great historical adventure or something like that. Knowing any way to break out of perhaps one traditionally narrow channel into the widest space as possible can be a very beneficial thing.
Are you all aware of some of the top comics news sites out there? You all, you don't. Okay, so we can't assume that they all know what they are, but
so it's a very small industry that's very heavily trafficked and heavily mined. But of those outlets, each traditionally has a very different point of view that probably serves all of our purposes very differently.
There's comicbookresources.com, there's newsarama.com, Comics Alliance,
Bleeding Cool,
IGN has a comics channel. There are also a lot of mid-sized blogs, and there are also, you know, blogs that just regular old comics fans like yourselves write that, you know, garner a lot of hits from time to time. And you like to work with, I like to work with anyone and everyone that shows interest in an Archaeo book. I don't turn any request down.
And who cares about bad reviews? I never understood people caring about bad reviews. I just, you know, any review was a good review.
People having an opinion about your work.
It's great.
It's a small victory.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, when I started out at Boom in 2007, I think that Boom was publishing like 4 or 7 books a month, and wasn't listed in the top 20 comic book companies. So I just scoured all the blogs, and anyone that mentioned Boom the last previous 2 years, I put on our press list, and I offered like PDF review copies, which at the time a lot of publishers weren't doing because they were afraid of piracy. And I was like, I don't care about piracy, I just want some reviews. And so by the time I left, I think I had like a review list, and it was like 400 people, you know, and just like any blog that, you know, wants to write about it. I mean, because it's a building effect. So, you know, it doesn't matter if you start out small. I mean, and I know people that like, they're like, I'm only going to send it to this guy because I know it's going to give me a good review. I never understood that. Just send it out to everybody.
And actually, you know, a story that I think I've told on one of these before. I remember, so before I was doing comics PR, when I was working in music, I worked for a record label in Olympia, Washington called K Records. And we had a lot of big indie releases, put out early records by like Modest Mouse and Built to Spill and some of these bands that went on to great success. However, we were still kind of a mid-sized label. And when I got there, you know, we weren't really working with any magazine bigger than Spin. And really the only music magazine bigger than Spin at that time, you know, this was the mid-90s, was Rolling Stone. And I remember myself and the founder of the label, this guy Calvin, we flew to New York to take meetings. And one of the meetings that I had been lucky enough to get was with Rolling Stone. And you know, I'm going into it really, you know, kind of overthinking it. I was really early into publicity at that point. I, much like Mel, did not think that I was going to go into publicity or marketing. I have a degree in audio engineering, which I'm not really doing a lot with now.
Film degree, right?
Yeah.
Using it every day.
So, but anyway. So I went out to New York. We get to this meeting at Rolling Stone, and I'm really nervous. And I remember this kid comes up to me, and he's you know, younger than I was at the time, and he was an intern. And he comes up to me and he's like, hey, you know, while you guys are waiting, can I get you any water or anything, you know, anything I can do or whatever? And I was like, oh yeah, you know, that'd be great. Well, if you could just show me where it is, that'd be awesome. Like, I can get my own water. You don't have to worry about me. So he, you know, walks me over, I get some water, I kind of make some conversation with him, and I sit down, and I remember sitting there anxiously waiting for our meeting. Well, turns out that we found out while sitting in the lobby that the guy we were supposed to meet with canceled. So I'm, of course, super disappointed, and we're leaving there, and Calvin, my boss at the time, looks at me and he's like, well, you never know who that guy will be in a couple of years. Well, in a couple of years, that guy was actually the executive editor of Rolling Stone. And then suddenly, when I started pitching him on stuff, he was very quick to return my calls, and for the first time ever, we were getting reviews in Rolling Stone. So those little sites, and those fans, and those people that you're working with now, you never know who they're going to be. I mean, I'll let Chip tell the story about how Comic Book Resources started out.
Oh, geez, that's a great story. How many people know that Comic Book Resources started out as a Kingdom Come fan forum, fan site?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah, and yeah, so.
You mean the band Kingdom Come?
Dude, Mark Waid kills it singing for that band. Just kills it. He can rip on guitar. So yeah, you know, and then what was it called after that? It was like Kingdom Come fan site. It had a big forum, and then it was like Jonah Weiland's like Comic Book Resources, and then he took his name off of it, and then it became Comic Book Resources. You know,
And now they're the #1 comic media site online. So.
yeah. No, so.
But you know, that's I got a small segue for that. So, and Hunter touched on this basically, that each of these sites serves sort of a different purpose. CBR tends to be relatively mainstream, or covers a lot of bigger properties. It's kind of like Comics Alliance will go sort of the artier angle, do these kinds of things. But when it comes to finding out, what sort of publisher you might want to approach with your project, if that's where you want to go, or what sort of news sites you might want to attack, or what I would do is find essentially comp titles to what you're doing. Find the thing that's closest to what you do, that you admire, that you would want to emulate any sort of aspect.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then find out, okay, my book is a dragon adventure story, and I really admire George R.R. Martin, and that's the sort of whatever. Then go, okay, who edits those books? Who covers those books? Who sells those books? Find something that is most like what you want to do, and focus your efforts that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I find that most people, especially creators who don't usually think about the business a lot. They're thinking about creating their stories or creating their art. You'll get these, especially when I was at Boom, and you get these long emails, with pitches and stuff, and it's like, I want to do a 12-issue maxi series, and blah. I'm like, we don't do 12-issue maxi series. And it was like a romance. I was like, have we ever done romance? And it's just like, know your audience, and know your target, and make it easy for people. I remember Heidi would do these, what were those roundups she did for Comic-Con? And so I sent, she was doing these roundups, and so she asked me right when I first started Boom, oh hey, can I get one from Boom? And I was like, okay. So I went to her website and I saw the format that she used, and I copy pasted that, and I filled it out exactly so she could just copy paste it into her blog. She's like, oh man, you really made that easy for me. And I was thinking what I asked her, was like, what do you mean? She's like, oh, people just send me reams of stuff and I have to edit it down. I'm like, oh yeah, so make it easy for people to promote your stuff. Make it easy for people to review your stuff. Make it easy for people to help you out. Don't send long emails that are gonna take people half an hour to read.
Right. Editors and all of their time is so finite.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, when I get an email, I don't know how many emails you guys get, but it's, it borders on 1,000 sometimes, and over the course of a couple of days. When you get that, if I get an email, it doesn't matter how important it is. If it's 2 pages long, I just go you just glaze over it. It could be from my fiance. It doesn't matter. And don't pitch it. What Chip just touched on this. Don't pitch anyone a 12-issue maxi series. Nothing intimidates an editor or a money person more than, when you pitch it's sort of like the old days when you pitched a Hollywood screenplay or something, it'd be like, you don't have a scene in a Vegas casino because that will cost a gazillion dollars to film. You know, a 12-issue maxi series, when someone sees that, or, you know, I have this great concept and it's all these arcs and it leads to this amazing place. That may be great, but start small with that 3 or 4 issue concept or the short story or whatever, you know, that someone could look, because what an editor sees a 12-issue maxi series, all they see is that's going to cost $80,000 to make.
For an extremely freeing artistic medium, and as great as that can be in comics, it's still an extremely commercial business, and there has to be a return on your money.
Right.
There's always people putting up money for printing and inventory and all that stuff.
Right. And so, you know, if they're willing to, if someone's willing to take a risk on your stuff, and that this does happen, but if they may not want to take an $80,000 risk, right? And so, and they won't even look at your pitch; they will glaze over and just think like, oh my God, I can, you know, it's about 7 planets, and you know, like we've all seen them.
Each issue is a different planet. Okay, let's take another question. Come on, you.
So with movies like The Avengers making $1 billion, it seems like the potential audience for comic books is more enormous than perhaps ever before. I'm curious what the industry is doing to take those people who go to movies and get them to